Hello everybody, it's AJ back again with a Mighty Glue Stick. How's it going? Okay, so as promised, I'm going to be covering Lizardfolk, and I'll start off straight away by just giving the basic stats for your average Lizardfolk. They have an armor class of 15, that includes their natural armor, which is 13 plus a shield. And they've got a hit points of 22, speed of 30 feet, either walking around on land or swimming. And they've got a strength of 15, dexterity of 10, constitution of 13, intelligence 7, wisdom 12, and charisma 7. They've got a +3 to perception, +4 to stealth, and +5 to survival. Passive perception is listed as 13, and they speak Draconic. They've got a challenge rating of half. They can hold their breath for 15 minutes, and they normally have a multi-attack, which takes the form of 2 melee attacks, each with a different weapon, which could either be its spiked shield, or a heavy club, or a javelin, or they can use a bite attack. The bite attack does it's +4 to hit. All of their attacks are +4 to hit, and do 5 points of piercing damage. Basically, everything they have does 5 points of piercing damage, unless it's a club. The javelin can be thrown 30 feet close range or 120 feet with a long range hit. So that's basic Lizardfolk for you. They've been around since 1975 in Dungeons and Dragons, basically right back at the beginning where they were known as Lizard Men. It's only around 2000 they became known as Lizardfolk. They are very much tied in with all of the editions of Dungeons and Dragons, and so they've got a lot of conflicting histories depending on which world setting you're going by. Because the 5th edition Monster Manual is largely based on the Forgotten Realms, the world of Toril and Faerun, they've got a richer background in that setting than anything else, really. So I'm going to be covering a lot of Ed Greenwood's back history and things like that about the creator races and stuff. So if we begin at the beginning and go right back to the Age of Thunder, where the 3 creator races, the amphibians, the avians, and the reptilian creator races, reputedly possessed civilizations rivaling any of those in Toril today. These went on in the Days of Thunder and Elven oral tradition, because the elves were too primitive to have even recorded anything back then. This is eons before humans even walked the earth, and before elves were civilized enough to actually write anything down. And this period of history was when the Lizardfolk were created, and it only ended during the time of dragons, where there was a catastrophic change in the world's climate and the continents reshaped themselves and marked the end of the supercontinent of Iquatel-Quasar. So, Lizardfolk are very basic in their outlook. They are a primeval people. Their civilization is based on survival, and they've got a very saurian outlook on things, a very lizardy outlook on things. They don't have any concept of morality as humans do, because they have a different metrics for survival than humans do. They don't survive as a social, close-knit social society per se. They survive by expediency. They breed by expediency, by being together, and by natural instincts drawing them to be attracted to each other and to breed and to propagate their race. But they don't sort of raise their children like parents normally do. They don't care for the young overly much. They just have an instinctual desire not to eat them. Lizardfolk taste disgusting. They have bitter, horrible skin, and they're just nasty to eat. There is a really good ecology of Lizardfolk back in Dragon 335, back in 2005, written by E. Scott and E. Wesley Snyder, and it's quite in depth, and it matches up a lot with the Lizardfolk listing in the 5th edition Monster Manual. So it's pretty good that way, although it's abbreviated greatly. So physically, Lizardfolk range between about 6 or 7 feet tall, so they're quite large but stooped. They weigh between 200 and up to 300 pounds, so they're tall but reasonably lean, actually. They've got white skin in a sort of a membrane that grows hard scales, ranging from onyx black to an olive green or a mud brown, and that's actually determined by what their eggs are gestated in. What they do is they bury their eggs in composting material, so plants, roots, that sort of thing, which keeps it warm in that sort of compost, but also whatever environment they're in determines their coloration, which seeps in through the porous egg membrane and actually determines what their cells are going to produce in the form of pigment. It says that it actually stains them, but of course that doesn't make a lot of biological sense. So what it does is that their pigmentation is determined by their environment. So a lizardfolk who has an olive green skin and a bright orange crest may in fact generate a dark brown or almost reddish if they move to a different environment and raise them in a different soil and different sort of trees and things like that. Say it's like an Amazon type river where there's lots of tannins in the water. The lizard folk will have a different coloration as a result. So you may have a very different looking population if the lizard folk have just arrived in that area. So you'll know that their population has been disrupted somehow because there's two very distinct looking lizard folk there, or there's some sort of intermingling or interbreeding of two different tribes, which is a possibility. So that's that. And of course their scales are fairly hard but supple, and they are amphibious reptiles that require moisture, so they can't exist in a deserty environment. That's where the asabi come in, which is a desert-living reptile species that are not lizard folk. They're quite different. They worship a god named Simuanya. Simuanya is one of, the mythology is that there were a pair of gods that existed together, and they were both sort of asexual. And then one of them was just concentrated, Simuanya was just concentrated on being a lizard and doing nothing but basically taking care of itself. It would laze on a rock in the sun, and it would hunt and kill whatever it wanted to and eat whatever it wanted to, and it basically just busied itself with just being a lizard folk, just existing. Whereas its counterpart was more worrisome and put a lot of thought into things and struggled and strived and things and thought about, why am I here, etc. And it became so conflicted, it split into male and female. And Simuanya is waiting for its mate, its best buddy, to recombine and become an asexual being once again, where it can join Simuanya again. And until then, it just patiently waits and doesn't really do a lot for lizard folk, but they're very reverent of their god and worship it in their own way. They don't build big temples or anything like that. They build rock shrines or collections of carved logs or something like that, or particularly interesting turtle shells or the skulls of large creatures that they've killed, and they'll form it into a shrine to Simuanya. There is another god called Sesnek, and Sesnek is a demon lord who exists in the Phantom Zone. It's a realm of the abyss, a layer of the abyss that Sesnek has locked off from everyone else and become very insular, and is solely concentrating on stealing away the worship of the lizard folk. And it does that by occasionally infecting a lizard folk egg with its own essence, creating the demon-blooded lizard kings or queens. And they're an entirely different kettle of fish. They've got a natural armor class of 15. They've got 78 hit points. They've got a challenge rating of 4. And they've got the ability to use these magical tridents as a weapon that they can attack with twice in a round. And they plus 5 to hit, do 6 points of piercing damage, or 7 if they're using it with both hands. And they can attack twice around with that. They can also, once around, skewer somebody, doing an extra 10 points or 3d6 worth of damage, and it gains temporary hit points equal to the extra damage it deals with the skewer attack. So it's like a blood drinker vampiric attack that it uses. And it just goes in and out of combat range, stabbing restrained people who have been tied up by other lizard folk by either being hooked with the spiked shields, or when lizard folk shaman transform themselves into crocodiles and latch onto somebody and restrain them, the lizard king or queen will come forward and stab them and drain their life, empowering itself with temporary hit points. Shamans, of course, they've got a challenge rating of 2. They're slightly more intelligent, intelligence of 10, wisdom of 15, and charisma of 8, and they have the ability to shapeshift into a crocodile. So they can magically polymorph and stay in that form for up to an hour, and can revert to its true form as a bonus action and sort of back and forth. And it keeps its normal stats. Of course, it's like a werefolk. It's almost like a voluntary lycanthropy where they turn into a crocodile. Of course, it's a subtle shift because lizard folk look kind of crocodile-y anyway. And they have cantrips that they can use. They cast as a 5th level spellcaster with a difficulty class 12, and they've got +4 to hit with all of their spell attacks, and also the weapon attacks +4 to hit. And the spells they can do are Druidcraft, of course, Produce Flame. They can produce a Thorn Whip as well, at will as a cantrip. They've got 4 slots for 1st level spells, Entangle and Fog Cloud being favoured. 3 slots for 2nd level spells, Heat Metal and Spike Growth are their favourites. And 2 slots of 3rd level spells, such as Plant Growth, and they can conjure reptiles. So that's the conjure animals spell, but they can only conjure things like large snakes, pythons, and other reptiles such as crocodiles and things, which can be very effective in a swamp environment. I would say that that's animals, so they can't conjure other types of lizard folk, because that would be devastating if they're doing it against each other. They are reptiles, of course. They are cold-blooded, so they love to heat themselves up on rocks and things. They don't have a very long lifespan, but they do mature very quickly. Typically, they will mature by the age of 5 or 6 or so, and they live easily they can live as long as a human being for 60 or 70 years. But their metabolism slows down, and towards the end of their life, they basically are quite sedentary and just concern themselves with staying as warm as they can, as long as they can, as often as they can. So they basically sunbathe on rocks most of the day, or logs or something, or in heated streams. If they find a swamp or something like that which has got a geothermal activity and hot springs, they'll be much more active because they can keep warm for longer and heat up very quickly. And of course, those hot pools will become sacred sites of the lizard folk, and they will guard them fanatically. And so hot pools and things like that would be places where you would almost expect to find them, particularly if it's within a densely forested area or a swampy area that is relatively hard to get to. The lizard folk would most definitely congregate there. That would be the centre of their civilization. So they've been around for a very, very long time. They're one of the original races. There was back in Forgotten Realms, which is what the 5th edition sort of concentrates on, there were the 3 creator races, the amphibian, avian, and reptilian creator races, which were the so the Saruk, see if I'm pronouncing that right, the Saruk, creators of the Yonti, Naga, lizard folk, and basically all of the scaly kind. The Batriachi, known as amphiboids, the amphibians, and they created bullywugs, doppelgangers, kopru, kotor, lokathar, sieves, taco, and other shape-shifting amphibious or fish-like races. And the Aeri, known as the avians, and they created the Arakokra, Kinkru, and other bird-like humanoids. And then, of course, there was the Fae, who have always been aloof from the world and concentrated on creating Fey realms, and but the Sylvans created the Corrids, the Sprites, the Pixies, and then later on, of course, came the humans and the elves and the dwarves. The humans stayed relatively primitive for a very long time. The elves and the dwarves were earlier to develop, and of course, in that time, of course, there was a big war between dragons and giants, which disrupted everything and brought the creator race's empires were pretty much destroyed before then due to massive ecological upset. And then the dragons arrived and sort of took things over. Anyway, that's a long time ago. But the creation of the Lizardfolk is definitely linked to the Saruk, and they had civilizations long before there were other humanoid races around. So they remember, or they have a tradition where elves were primitives once, as far as they're concerned. But they were never particularly advanced. They never have been. They never needed to be. They never want to be. They have no inclination to advance. And that is a very alien mindset to a humanoid such as an elf or a dwarf or a halfling or a human. The Lizardfolk have no ambition other than to survive, and they have no sense of traditional morality. They are true neutral. They will just do what they need to do, whatever motivates them to get up off their rock. If food moves into their realm, they'll concern themselves with hunting and eating that food, and they don't care what form that food takes. So whether it's a rival lizardfolk, whether it's a human, whether it's a monkey, whether it's a rabbit, whether it's some particularly chewy, yummy tasting moss, they don't care. They're omnivorous. They prefer eating flesh, and they really like the way that humans taste, and which can be fairly problematic because it's almost impossible to train them out of eating humanoid. If they've been raised amongst their own kind, they see nothing wrong with it. They see nothing wrong with anything they do. All of their actions are natural as far as they're concerned. They have no desire for wealth. They have no interest in coin or gems or pretty jewelry and things like that. They make tools and things are expertly crafted out of the objects in their environment. They are perfectly organic. They create shields out of the shells of hardback turtles, spikes out of bone or claw or tooth. They use jade or other hard rocks which they set into their clubs and hammers and mauls and things, and they craft javelins and tridents and bowlers and nets and that sort of thing. So they make whatever tools they need. They always have, and they always will. Occasionally they will erect stonework and things like that under the motivation of a lizard king or queen who will direct them to create some semblance of a demonic civilization as far as I see. So that's when they will erect a stepped temple, pyramid, and engage in wide-scale blood sacrifice, and they'll actually go out of their way to capture people and sacrifice them to evil gods. Otherwise, they largely just concern themselves with their own existence and their own territory. They are very territorial, and if you enter into their territory, you are lucky if you don't end up on the menu. They will just consider you to be game. And so trade with lizardfolk is problematic at best. About the best thing you could do, they get on fairly well with halflings because they know that halflings are plentiful suppliers of food. They produce food. So from their survival mentality, it makes sense not to eat a halfling if the halfling is going to bring you food. So they understand that sort of adult concept of don't eat the cookie now, this cookie can bring you better cookies. So they get on very well with halflings because they understand that halflings are the best at bringing them food. Now, if a human figures this out and brings them food and offers them food, they've taken away that first survival instinct, which is gain food. And if you've brought food with you that doesn't involve the effort of killing you and the possible harm to yourself or themselves, then you're off to a good start. You don't want to go in there and offer them coins. They've got no interest in that. They'll just tear your arm off like a Wookiee. You want to offer them food. You want to offer them information about other lizard folk or the environment or things that are going on at the borders of their realm. They don't give the further you go away from where they live, the less they care about what's going on in the world. They really don't. It's not interesting to them. They'll want to know if there's anything that's going to affect their river. If there's some sort of taint or industrial poison which is going on in their river, they're going to be rabidly curious about that, because moving is a concept they don't like. They don't like change. Change is bad. So that's when they will seek out elves or halflings to advise them that they will give something to them in exchange for that. That's about the only time that they'll seek actual material wealth, is to pay somebody to figure something out for them, to fix something. That's when they really they think about it and okay, well, yeah, we need to sort this out. Somebody's poisoning our river. They live in the same environment. Generally speaking, they live in pretty nasty environments. There's not a lot of humanoids that likes living in swamps, and there's a lot of big nasty monsters that do. So lizard folk have a lot of very good techniques for dealing with nasty, monstrous, swamp-living critters. They can hunt dinosaurs. They can take out velociraptors. They are very adept at making pit traps, swinging vine traps, trip hooks, kissing maiden, all sorts of nasty stuff that will get a humanoid no problem. We're not very adept at avoiding that sort of thing. But the traps will be robust, easy to make, and fairly simple. I mean, they're just dealing with animals here. Intelligent monsters are another killer fish, and that's when they'll send in shamans and special attack squads. Their civilization is mostly ruled by, in a patriarchy where the males are the largest and strongest, and it makes sense that they are ruled by the strongest, because that's what you need when you're living in a nasty environment. They all breed. Shamans in particular have an extra emphasis on them to breed, because they want to preserve that magical bloodline. So shamans, one of the unusual things about them is if a shaman, if for whatever reason is unable to breed anymore, it may be put out, may be exiled, or may actually go out and suicide, which is again a weird thing, but there you go. They're an alien culture. The lizard kings or queens, of course, ramp up their aggression enormously. They turn them into a fighting force, and it's only in times of high ecological or social stress that the lizard king or queens put on them, that they will actually combine their forces in multiple tribes or clans of lizard folk coming together to rampage, fight, and leave their environment to go and do nasty things elsewhere. Also, in the history of the Forgotten Realms, there was a large group of lizard folk who were forcibly removed, put into slavery as a labor force, and were taken to populate a new area. And that also influenced their culture quite a bit, where they picked up a few habits from the civilized races that enslaved them, that persist to this day. Now, there is a lot of variation in the lizard folk because they've been around for a very long time. And you'll have the black scale lizard folk, who are large, brutish, and very aggressive. You've got smaller green scale lizard folk. Some of them have quite, like the males typically have a single crest of more brightly coloured membrane with sort of spines that can pop up or down. Their tails are about 4 feet long or so. They're non-prehensile. They're just basically concerned with balance. They're more like a crocodile tail, although I guess they could give you a slap with it. They're really not very adept at it. They're not agile enough to do that sort of thing. But they're not slow and ponderous, and they typically maintain their body temperature so that they're never really completely sluggish. There's no provision in the rules for slowing them down by making them cool. However, they would probably avoid icy terrain like the plague, because it would require enormous amounts of metabolic energy from them eating things and moving around constantly, or trying to heat up but they can't regulate their temperature the same way that mammals do. So they do overheat or become too cool, and they can't operate very well at night time and things like that in the cold. It's just, it burns up too much energy. However, they can go for a long time without food, and they can gorge themselves on meat and then survive for a very long time without food and water, much longer than a human can. And they can withstand quite a lot of physical stress, typically, a lot of damage and things. They're quite robust. They heal pretty well, and some of them can have some pretty impressive scars where they've taken a bite in the shoulder by a velociraptor, or had an arm rendered by an anaconda, which has gotten a bit too frisky. But otherwise, yeah, they're just typical humanoids. They're primitive critters. But they've got pretty good senses. They taste their tongue out into the air to scent and things. They've got a very sibilant and barking and warbling way of talking. They're fun to roleplay as a DM, for sure. And it's great to play them as a very primitive society that just... they'll get the first few words in a sentence, and once the big words come out, or the sentence is too long or too flowery, they just lose it. There's no idea what you're talking about. You've got to be very direct. You've got to offer them... you've got to cater to their instincts first, and then deal with the brain afterwards. Reptile brain is their brain. So you don't want to get them angry. You don't want to get them riled up. You don't want to get them too hungry. You don't want to threaten them in any way. Because they'll react straight away, and they will do so aggressively and without control or restraint. And it's not their fault, really. I mean, they've survived for a very, very long time because they react to threats and danger by getting rid of it. And it's for the greater good of lizardfolk in general that they do act to kill anything which would kill them. So a few sacrifices along the way is good for them as a whole. As for their god, doesn't really intervene overly much, doesn't really even do anything against the demon lord, which is trying to steal away its flock. Just doesn't care. Looks after itself, really, and is not really motivated to intervene, unless maybe something is going to genocide its entire lizardfolk brethren. It's just patiently waiting for them to reunite eventually, hanging out in the concordant lands of the Beastlands, out in the middle plains somewhere. Yeah. As for their interactions with other societies and civilizations, they remain aloof. They don't want to leave their environment, and they don't want their environment invaded by anyone else or disrupted. And the only real problems you're going to have with them is if you go into the forbidding terrain where they live, which is fairly silly in its own right. Human beings are not very well adapted to the swampy environments that lizardfolk call home, or the underground caverns and things which are swampy and murky, and fairly toxic and full of diseases and carnivorous plants and reptiles and God knows what else. But yeah, you can interact with them for sure. You can trade with them. They can make flutes and carved woodwork, shells. They can make beads and stuff. And of course you can learn some druidcraft from them if you're really, really good and you get along with a particular shaman. Just, you got to be careful around breeding time and during the full moon where they decide to have a ceremony of some sort where they sacrifice a critter. And if they haven't gone hunting or hunting's been bad, you're the critter. So, yeah, you got to be very careful with lizardfolk. They're basically walking, talking animals in many ways. But strangely, they've been around for a very long time. And they will probably continue to be around for a very long time in both Dungeons & Dragons and Forgotten Realms in particular. So, what shall I do next in the next video, eh? I think it's about time I did a monstrology video. So, I'm going to cover some extra topics on my next video. Also, for those who are interested, because I'm approaching 100 monster ecology videos, I've set up a Patreon page if anybody's interested, or if you can find it. It's listed somewhere on my YouTube channel, stats or something somewhere. So if you can find it, and if you feel so inclined, feel free. I'll be most appreciative. Otherwise, I'll be talking with you again soon.